So we here established that if two lines are parallel, their slopes are going to be identical. They're going to be equal. So you can just copy and paste the slope from one to the other one. So for example, these two equations are going to be parallel because they have the same slope. These equations are parallel because they have the same slope. These equations are parallel because they have the same slope. We say two lines are perpendicular if their slopes multiply to -1, or if you flip the fraction and flip the sign. So for example, if I have this slope of a +2 for this function, it is 2 over 1. So if I flip it upside down, that's a 1 over 2. And this was positive, so if I make it negative, this would be an example of an equation that's perpendicular to that equation. It doesn't matter what its intercept is. What matters is the slopes, right? And as far as what if I multiply these? So for example, 2 times -1/2. How do we know that these are perpendicular? Because we said if you multiply the slopes, it comes out to be -1. So if I multiply these slopes, I get -2 over 2 is -1. So these slopes are perpendicular to each other. If I have this equation, then how do I get the slope of the perpendicular line? You flip this, you reciprocate, right? The reciprocal is the flip of the fraction. So the 7 becomes a denominator, the 3 becomes a numerator. And then this was a negative, so the opposite sign would be a positive. So for example, this equation right here could be the equation of a line that's perpendicular to this one right here. And they're perpendicular because the slopes are oppositely signed reciprocals of each other. And if you were to multiply these two fractions to each other, you're going to get a -1. So for problem 1, let's go ahead and we've been throwing the word slope around a lot. Let's go ahead and do some algebra with the slope. Let's find the slopes of all of these equations, right? Of all of these lines right here. So we have line A, B, C, and D. I'm going to color code them for you. And in order to find the slope, we have to use the 2 points of that line. Keeping in mind that a coordinate is X and Y. And the slope is rise over run. So that means I subtract the Y's from each other, and I divide that by the X's subtracting each other. So we identify what each item is, and we go ahead and plug it into this equation. Always use parentheses. It's a good habit. We then simplify this, keeping in mind that the negative and the negative here gives me a +3. So the slope for the blue line, line A, is going to be 1 over 3. And by the way, for those of you that can handle the truth, if I start on this blue point and try to go to the next point, I go 1 up, and then I go 1, 2, 3 over, and this is rise over run, so that would be 1 over 3. Here's a setup for line B, the red line, with its slope. Incidentally, if you want to count, right, we go 1 up, and then 2 over, 1, 2, hence 1 over 2. For the green line, line C, here's our appropriate setup, keeping in mind that this is Y2, this is X2, and then this point has the other 2 components. And if we do the math here, without the parentheses, we would make a lot of mistakes. But with the parentheses, we can be confident what we're doing here. So we does a -4, but this minus and a minus gives me a +5. And down here, I have a 1, minus minus is a +2. And this becomes a positive 1 over 2. And make sure to fix this. I wrote a 2, but it should be a 1. I just fixed it for you. The numerator, of course, is a +1. And -4 plus 5. Look at the number line. For line D, you don't see 2 purple points on here. But I'm going to propose here that this blue point is on this purple line. So I'm going to use that point, and I'm going to use this point. And in this case, I'm going to use this one as my second point, and this other point as my first point. Here I just set up, and if we simplify this, I get a -2 in the numerator, and I get a -2 plus 3 in the denominator, which becomes a +1. -2 over 1 is a -2. Now, let's take a moment to comment on the slopes. How do we know if two lines are parallel? They have the same slope. So we look at all four of our slopes. You'll note that line B and line C have identical slopes of 1/2. And because they have the same slopes, we can say that line B is parallel to line C. Perpendicular is a little trickier. So in order to find out if two lines are perpendicular, you can recognize that they have the opposite signs and they're reciprocals. Or if you wanted to multiply the slopes and get -1, that also works. Look at lines C and D, for example. Look at their slopes. So C is 1 over 2. D is -2 over 1. Note that 1 over 2 is 2 over 1 flipped, right? That's the reciprocal. And notice that C is positive and D is negative. So we can make the claim that C is perpendicular to D because their slopes are reciprocated, they're inverted, they're flipped, and they also have different opposite signs. By that logic, we can also say that B is perpendicular to D, because if you look at the slope of B, if you flip it upside down, that's 2 over 1. And it's positive right now, but if you make it negative, you get the same answer as we did over here, or over here. So B is perpendicular to D. Line A is not perpendicular to anybody, and is not parallel to anybody. We call this line skew. So a little bit writing for you to do, and I left some blanks for you to listen carefully to fill them in. But here we have a graph with two lines. We'll call this first line line AB, and the second line we'll call line CD. And we need to write about how do we tell if these two lines are parallel to each other. So first, what we need to do is find the slope of this first line, line AB. Okay, and to do that, it might help for us to actually figure out what these points are. So here's our 2 points for B and A, and we go ahead and set up the slope formula, which is rise over run, which is subtract the y values, subtract the x values, divide the 2. So I have 5 minus 4 over 3 minus 0. That's 1 over 3. So the slope of line AB is 1/2. We use the lowercase letter m for slope. So line AB has a slope of 1/2. Then we find the slope of line CD. So that comes from the setup right here. We have the slope formula set up. We'll have a 3 minus a 2 and a 4 minus a 1. If we simplify that, we get 1 over 3. That is the slope of the second line CD. I think I did a typo before, but it's fixed now. So the first one had a slope of 1/3. The second one had a slope of 1/3. If the two lines are parallel, the slopes should be equal to each other. Now, from what we've done, the slopes are equal. So that means these two lines are parallel. So one big takeaway about this topic is, do you know how to find the slope? For your summary, how can you tell if two lines are parallel to each other or perpendicular to each other? Please take some time to write down your thoughts about that.